Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei Was Terribly Betrayed and Kills Everyone One by One Part 2. Before we start, please go support Zack-Oblivion for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Issei is a male in this story. Chapter 8. Indian Faction. Issei and his companions can be seen levitating above the palace of the Hindu god Shiva. The brown-haired boy looked at the structure with cold, evil eyes, but still did not erase his innocent smile. "Let's the show begin." It was the only thing he said as he pointed his index finger at the palace, then launched a blast of energy from it. The attack hit the palace, causing a part of it to explode at the same time, as a little smoke began to come out of the impact area. This put all its residents on alert. Soon after, it was seen how the god of destruction Shiva left his castle with clear anger reflected on his face. He quickly noticed the presence of the three intruders, appearing a few meters in front of them, looking at them with a serious face and clear anger. "Issei Hyoudou." He spoke the boy's name with venom and hatred in his voice. "Oh my god, I can't believe it, it's the awesome Papa Smurf," he shouted, pointing his finger at the god. The veins stood out on the boy's forehead from the insult, while the boy's companions burst out laughing at what was said. "You're a bucking bastard, we'll see how long you keep that attitude up," he said, getting into a battle stance. Whatever you want, Smurf god, cow trihexa, take care of the rest of the obstacles," he exclaimed while seeing, out of the corner of his eye, how several gods were approaching quickly. They simply nodded as they headed at full speed towards their opponents, leaving Issei alone looking amused at the blue god, although Shiva looked with wide eyes at the girl. Did Issei try trihexa? But it's impossible, unless these were the surprise god's thoughts. "Alright Shiva-kun, let's begin." He smiled darkly as a kind of black flames with red edges surrounded him. These radiated great power and caused strong gusts of wind. These slowly went out, revealing Issei with a new outfit. The boy's new clothes consisted of a kind of long black trench coat, pants of the same color, which were held up by a kind of white bandage as a belt, but he also had a black katana-type sword and a white mask with red details, this being the most notable, only revealing his cold, dark eyes. "I'm ready now, come with everything, Shiva," the boy said in a challenging tone as he got into a combat stance. The battle begins. Note: before starting, I want to say that when searching for information about Shiva, the real-life one, I found that he could control the elements, so I will give him that kind of powers. The Hindu god began to release a great magical aura around him. In a quick movement he would launch himself at full speed trying to kick Issei. He simply dodged it by crouching, making Shiva pass him by. He would not give up so easily, beginning to expel fire from two of his forearms, using this power to spin on his own axis to try to give Issei a right hook. This being also dodged without difficulty, the god would begin to fly towards the sky to once again come down with his leg ready to kick, adding the power he obtained from the fall. The brown-haired man dodged this with a simple jump, causing the blue being's attack to hit the ground, leaving a large crater followed by a smoke screen. The boy would see how light was produced in the cloud of dust, and then Shiva was shown preparing a powerful attack of fire magic. Without hesitation, he launched a devastating attack on the boy dressed in black. Without flinching, he swung his sword, managing to deflect the attack with a simple blow towards a nearby mountain, which was reduced to nothing by the attack of the Hindu god. The boy would land on the ground, unfazed by the sight of the mountain being reduced to mere rubble. "Gosh, that was close, it could have burned my clothes," she commented calmly and mockingly without looking at the god, since her gaze was still on the place where the mountain used to be. Damn it, I need to go faster," Shiva growled in frustration as he raised his magic power even higher, and his fists were enveloped by thick layers of stone. Issei, noticing the increase in the god's power, fixed his sight on him. The cocky Smurf disappeared in a blur of speed, being reciprocated by his opponent. Both began to exchange blows, if that's what it could be called. This, since Shiva was chasing Issei with all his speed at the same time, that he tried to hit him even if it was a blow, which was useless. For every failed blow by Shiva, a crater was formed either on the ground or on a mountain they passed by. The god would launch another blow, much stronger than the previous ones, forming a gigantic crater in the ground, but there was no trace of the chestnut. Did he disappear? Have I been chasing an afterimage this whole time? The leader of the Hindu faction thought in shock and some fear. Before he could do anything, he feels a hand touch his shoulder. He quickly turns around only to see the cold eyes, like the North Pole, of Issei. The boy without hesitation launches a cut with his sword, which hits the god of destruction in the chest. Blood began to flow out of the wound, staining Issei's mask a little, while Shiva had a face of deep terror. However, in the god's forehands appeared small magic circles, which radiated a great orange glow. "Incinerate," he shouted, launching his powerful attack all over Issei's face, burning his clothes. The god's attack lasted a few seconds as he healed his wound with magic, all the while breathing heavily. "Ah damn, this brat is too strong," I whispered with anger and frustration. The god believed that he had managed to weaken the boy, but suddenly he feels like an enormous pressure is present throughout the place at the same time that a huge amount of dark energy with a red glow comes out of the place where Issei was. The god looked in fear as the energy dissipated, showing the boy in a new form. This one had a new mask much more terrifying than the other. With 2 large horns, his skin turned pale as snow, he had some black marks on his chest, his hands were claws, of his clothes, only his pants remained, his brown hair grew much longer reaching the lower part of his back, but the most notable thing was a hole that was at the height of his heart. He looked like a real demon. Apart from that, when he saw him he felt a huge chill. As if his instincts were screaming danger. It would be shown that Issei's sword was a few meters behind him, it would simply fly into the hand of its wielder, and the brown-haired boy with a simple movement of his hands would destroy everything behind him. The now monster looked with cold and bloodthirsty eyes, which could be seen through his mask, to point his horns towards the god, beginning to charge a kind of energy array. Mirda. That was the only thing Shiva said, so that a huge explosion of red color could be seen throughout the donut. Hi trihexa. You can see the black-haired man fighting against the Hindu god Krishna. Cao fiercely attacked the god using his spear Longinus at a speed that the god could barely react, receiving many stabs, leaving him with serious wounds. Damn, how the hell can you use your sacred gear if the heaven system is supposed to be no longer working, the god shouted in anger. The black-haired man just smiled mockingly as he pointed his spear at him. Oh, this. It's just a small gift from my leader. He smirked as he charged at the badly injured god. While this was happening, Trihexa was sweeping the floor with the Hindu goddess Ganesha. The goddess tried everything she could to try to even scratch her. This forced the Hindu goddess to be on the defensive, covering herself with a magic circle as a shield. DCH, damn hitch, let yourself be killed, I shouted furiously, launching a magic attack at her. The dragon of the apocalypse would deflect the attack with one hand without difficulty, while looking bored at the badly injured goddess. But what a disappointment, I must say that I am surprised that you are a goddess with how weak you are. I see why my lord wants you dead, you and your faction are just trash. He said, looking coldly at the Hindu goddess. Before anyone could do anything, a large number of magic circles appeared from which all the gods of the Hindu faction came out, along with all their troops and soldiers ready to fight. Cao realized this and jumped away from his opponent, standing next to his purple-haired companion. They both looked seriously at the enemy army without flinching. They didn't have a single bit of fear, being totally calm. So they finally brought their troops. The bearer of the true Longinus said calmly. Luckily we do too. The purple-haired girl smiled evilly. Behind them both appeared a huge magic circle from which hundreds of strange humanoid creatures emerged. Their skin was black, they had long tails that ended in a sharp stinger, but the most notable thing was that they had no eyes. Both armies faced each other for the first time, and without hesitation, they launched an attack ready to end the lives of the members of the enemy army. Cao and Trihexa watched with a serious look as both armies massacred each other. They watched as the Indian army began to gain ground, managing to kill several xenomorphs. Despite the great strength of these aliens, the physical and magical strength of the Indian soldiers far exceeded that of the evil alien army. This began to slightly worry the bearer of the true Longinus. Don't say anything, the purple-haired girl told him without even looking at him, as if she knew what her partner was going to say. But our army is being massacred, he said with concern, but before he could continue, Trihexa interrupted him. Our Lord Issei chose this race to fight against the Hindu faction, and I think I know why. He exclaimed as he watched the battle with a confident smile. On the battlefield, a soldier using a sword would cut off the head of a xenomorph, killing it instantly. However, from the alien's corpse, a large amount of green blood would come out, staining greatly. Before he could react, he would feel enormous pain throughout his body. The pain was such that he could not help but let out a heartbreaking scream that resonated throughout the place. I scream in pure pain. Some of those nearby turned to see where the scream came from, only to be met with a horrible scene. The soldier's skin began to melt at an enormous speed, followed by his flesh, which also melted, leaving the bones visible to all his comrades, who were horrified to see how their companion died from such a macabre death. Cao looked at this fact in surprise and then looked at a smiling Trihexa. The blood of these creatures is pure acid, that's why Issei Sama chose them, because alive and dead they will continue to cause harm. He explained calmly. At that, the ground began to shake slightly, leaving them confused and somewhat scared, but their faces changed to ones of shock when they saw how 4 huge creatures similar to the T-Rex appeared, followed by several creatures similar to the xenomorphs but larger, but without a doubt the most notable was a horrible creature of great size, with 4 arms. A large head shaped like a kind of crown and a long tail. The heavyweights have arrived. Trihexa smiled evilly. All the creatures let out a war cry to launch themselves against the enemy army. Back with Issei. The brown-haired boy can be seen launching several attacks at high speed with his sword at Shiva. He would defend himself with magic circles, but it was of little use since these were destroyed with a simple blow from his opponent's sword. Issei would launch another slash at the Hindu god, who would defend himself with a magic circle. Both would begin to struggle while staring at each other. Shiva seriously and Ira, while Issei mockingly. "Damn it, don't underestimate me," I shouted in anger. Hearing what the god of destruction said, one could swear that a macabre smile appeared on the mask, which sent shivers down the spine of the Hindu god. "As you wish. Itsuga Tensho," he said with a voice from beyond the grave as the sword began to glow and a huge explosion of energy covered them both while destroying everything around them. When the smoke from the explosion cleared, it was possible to identify a seriously injured Shiva with blood coming out of his entire body, while Issei looked at him with mockery and superiority. "You damn bastard, don't think you've defeated me yet." The god tried to sound threatening, but his wounds wouldn't let him. Hearing this, the brown-haired boy could only let out a light laugh, leaving Shiva confused. "What are you laughing at?" he demanded to know. "You still don't realize it," he said mockingly, leaving the blue god confused. "You're getting weaker. As the battle progressed, your blows and attacks became weaker. This is because humans no longer pray to you or the other factions," he explained, leaving Shiva horrified, who was in shock with his eyes wide open. "Soon, both the other faction leaders and the so-called gods will become so weak that it won't even be necessary for me to fight them to kill them. They will be as weak as an ordinary human, not to mention that because the heaven system no longer works, all sacred gear, well almost all, no longer work at all. In other words, my victory is assured." The thick and creepy voice only caused more and more nerves in Shiva, who began to tremble from pure terror. Without saying more, Issei launched himself forward ready to attack Shiva, who got into a defensive position. However, the boy would appear to the left of the god, taking him by the head to begin dragging him along the ground, causing him to practically swallow earth. He would throw Shiva into the air, where he would throw another Jutsuga Tensho at him. The god could not dodge it, receiving the attack squarely, being even more hurt than he already was. The Hindu god was on the ground seriously wounded, and now without magical power. He would watch with deep terror as the brown-haired man approached slowly towards him. He would try with all his might to get up, but these efforts would be useless due to the severity of his injuries. Issei would finally reach where the god used his foot to slam his head against the ground while pointing his horns at him, beginning to charge a powerful attack. "Last words?" I asked ominously. "I mercy," she said with the deepest terror running through her entire body as she looked into Issei's terrifying eyes through his mask. After that, the only thing that was seen in the whole place was a gigantic red explosion that shook the ground of the whole place. Returning to where Cao and Trihexa were, you can see that the battlefield had become a lake of acidic green blood. Many corpses of both xenomorphs and soldiers and Hindu gods could be seen. The only ones left alive from Issei's army were a couple of Praetorians, a xenomorph T-Rex and the queen. All the others had perished in battle, but this had little or no effect on Issei's plans. After all, he could recreate them out of nothing in less than a second. Next to the black-haired and purple-haired man, Issei seemed at his signature base without a single scratch and showing his typical innocent smile. "Nice to see you, my lord. How did it go with Shiva?" the bearer of the true Longinus asked respectfully. "Honestly, it was disappointing. I expected more from the god of destruction, but well, we better go. We're done for today. The Hindu faction has fallen." It was the last thing he said as he saw the battlefield full of corpses and then disappeared into a vortex with his subordinates and the surviving xenomorphs, leaving the desolate field full of death and acid. Chapter 9. Know the Fear. After Issei and his subjects massacred the Hindu faction, the other factions were quick to arrive at the scene upon sensing the power of the god Shiva. The leaders had a bad feeling. Deep down they knew what was happening, but they prayed with all their might that it was just a mistake. However, to their misfortune, all their fears were confirmed when they arrived at what was once the palace of one of the 10 most powerful supernatural beings. Shiva's castle was in ruins with the corpses of the soldiers and Hindu gods decorating the battlefield, looking like a macabre and at the same time beautiful work of art, and of course, the enormous sea of acid that covered the entire place did not pass by. But what stood out most of that horrendous scene was the corpse of what was once the god of destruction. Shiva's body lay on the ground without his head and with only one of his arms. He had hundreds of wounds, most of his bones were broken, apart from the fact that he was in a pool of his own blood. That day the other faction leaders held a decent funeral for the deceased god. At the same time, the news could not be contained, ending up spreading like wildfire throughout all the other factions. Of course, this only increased the fear of the inhabitants. If it was possible at this point, the supernatural world was increasingly weaker and the leaders did not know what to do at this point. The only thing they did in their eagerness to survive was to put their respective troops on high alert, which now guarded each city of each faction 24 out of 7 days a week, apart from the fact that almost no one left their homes for fear of that entity that was proclaimed as a god, an absolute being. Time skip. Kiba was seen walking through the streets of the underworld with his head down, his eyes almost dull. These days the situation for the supernatural was going from bad to worse. Not only had the Mayu died at the hands of their former hero, but now that the humans knew of the existence of the supernatural and stopped praying to them, the power of the factions was declining every second. All this only made the blonde's guilt grow, at the same time his eyes filled with tears. The blonde was so immersed in his sadness that he didn't notice when a small brown-haired boy appeared out of nowhere and began pulling on his leg. "Hey sir, are you okay?" the little boy asked innocently. The blonde Gremory looked down at the child's innocent face, only to let out a sad sigh. "No, I'm not. Things are terrible. It would be best if you went home, little one. It's not safe to be on the streets anymore," I advised, trying to sound serious, but the sadness wouldn't let me. "Come on Kiba-kun, don't be sad, the fun is just beginning." The little boy's voice suddenly turned dark. Kiba opened his eyes in horror as he recognized the voice, turning his head so quickly that he almost broke his neck, only to stare in horror as Issei stood in front of him with his now classic innocent smile. "Hey, Kiba, how long have you missed me? Come on, admit it, you missed me," she said mockingly. The Gremory Knight took a step back without losing his horrified expression directed at the brunette in front of him. "I say," was the only thing that came out of the blonde's lips. "Hey, what's wrong, Kiba? You look like you've seen a ghost," the boy said, still smiling, but with a mocking tone. Kiba gulped for a second to put on a serious face looking at Issei still with fear in his eyes. What the hell do you want?" Kiba asked trying to sound serious, but fear didn't stop him. The brown-haired boy didn't say anything, he just changed his innocent smile to a sinister and macabre one, causing a great shiver in the blonde. From one second to the next, Kiba began to feel very sleepy at the same time that he began to stagger from one side to the other, his vision became blurry until he finally fell unconscious against the hard and cold ground. Seeing how the Gremory Knight fainted, Issei's smile only grew larger, becoming an expression full of madness and bloodlust. "I'm going to enjoy this like you can't imagine," the brunette said in a lunatic tone of voice. "Time skip." The blonde began to wake up little by little, he felt dizzy and had a slight migraine, he tried to move, but couldn't. Once his vision cleared, he realized he was in a large room with a black and white tiled floor, looking like a large checkerboard. Kiba also noticed how both his hands and feet were tied to a very rusty iron chair with chains, preventing him from escaping. Suddenly the blonde would hear a somewhat high-pitched sound, he would observe how a rusty metal door would slowly open at the same time as a humanoid figure entered. The boy instantly recognized the newcomer being none other than Issei. "Hello Kiba-kun, I'm glad you're awake." I greeted him with a smile and took a childish look. The blonde knight did not respond due to the fear that this situation generated in him, he was totally defenseless in front of the person who hated him the most, without a doubt this would not end well for Kiba. "I guess I don't have to explain why you're here, do I?" he asked as a small table with several objects appeared beside him, making Kiba even more nervous as he began to sweat profusely. "Let's start with the fun. Warning. The next scene is of torture, so if you are sensible I recommend you skip this part, otherwise if you like gore like me enjoy and prepare the popcorn." The brown-haired boy would take several needles as he slowly approached Kiba, who upon seeing Issei's intentions, would begin to move desperately trying to free himself and flee, although of course, this was useless. Once Issei was in front of Kiba, he grabbed his right hand tightly and then brought one of the needles to Kiba's thumb. The blonde looked at this in terror while sweating profusely. Issei began to slowly stick the needle under Kiba's nail, who, upon feeling his flesh separate from his nail, began to scream in pure pain while writhing wildly in the chair due to the pain. Issei continued until he inserted most of the needle into Kiba's finger, leaving only a few centimeters. He would repeat this same process with each and every one of the blonde's fingers, who did not stop screaming in pain, his eyes only reflecting enormous fear and pain at that moment. "Oh come on Kiba, don't hang around, there's still a long way to go before our game ends." The brown-haired boy smiled psychopathically. Then he would take what appeared to be a car battery from the table, placing it on the floor, and then taking out several cables which he connected to the battery, while the other end he connected to the remaining part of the needles that were still stuck in Kiba's fingers, both hands and feet. "Okay, everything is ready, let's see what happens, let's start with about 500 volts. He exclaimed, smiling innocently to Kiba's horror. The brown-haired boy, with just the push of a button, would activate the battery so that a large amount of electricity would come out of it and be conducted towards the needles. This caused enormous pain in Kiba. He could feel how all that electricity ran from the tips of his fingers, followed by his arms until reaching every part of his body, causing him enormous pain. In this way, Issei electrocuted Kiba for several minutes with increasing amounts, reaching a maximum of 3000 volts. "Alright, get ready for round 2. The brunette said as he picked up a hammer from the small table. The boy would raise the hammer high and then drop it hard on the thumb of Kiba's right hand, which was crushed without problems, eliciting another heartbreaking scream from the oxygenated boy. The following tortures that Issei applied to Kiba were each worse and more painful than the last. The brown-haired boy had cut off his fingers and toes, then cauterized the wounds with a small but powerful flame that came out of one of his fingers, stopping the bleeding but causing enormous pain to the blonde. He had also torn out both of his eyes with a rusty knife, causing more and more heart-wrenching screams to the point that the blonde felt his vocal cords begin to hurt. Issei also put drops of lemon juice and many grains of salt in the sockets where his eyes used to be, increasing the boy's pain and suffering. Then he pulled out each and every one of his teeth, including his molars, with telekinesis. After that, with his hand in pure brute force, he grabbed the Grimoire Knight's jaw and ripped it off in one go. The blonde at this point couldn't even scream and could only writhe in pain. The brown-haired boy, using metal tweezers that were red hot, grabbed the blonde's tongue and ripped it out mercilessly. The blonde's eyes were beginning to lose their shine, looking like the eyes of a dead person. He was still alive, however. Kiba wished with all his might that death would take him, or at least that would be the case if he still had his eyes. Issei, with a whip, which had several nails, began to hit Kiba's body hard, leaving him with many wounds all over, only to throw a large bucket of boiling oil at the blonde, leaving him with many second and even third-degree burns. The blonde was no longer screaming, due to his lack of tongue, and he was not writhing in pain either. He was completely broken. He just wanted Issei to kill him to end his suffering. Too bad Issei had other plans for him. End of torture. Well, Kiba-kun, it was a lot of fun playing with you, but unfortunately everything has an end, and this game is no exception. In front of Kiba, a dark portal appeared in which only a great and infinite darkness could be seen. Issei grabbed Kiba by the neck and with pure brute force, threw him into the portal, which closed instantly. The blonde stood up, realizing that his body was intact. He didn't even have a scar. He realized that he was in a huge place full of darkness. It was like walking with his eyes closed. He suddenly covered himself as if something or someone was watching him. Kiba stretched his trembling hand in front of him, trying to touch something, but there was nothing. The boy was beginning to despair. "Who are you? Show yourself at once," the Grimoire Knight shouted in fear. Suddenly the blonde felt an icy breath on the back of his neck, causing all the hairs on his body to stand on end, and his instinct screamed danger. At that moment Kiba heard the most terrifying words he had ever heard in his entire life. "I am fear. I. It was a scream filled with fear and terror in its purest form. That scream was the last thing that was heard and would be heard again from Hyoudou Kiba. Back with Issei, he was back in his secret lair, which was a gigantic luxury mansion, with his subordinates enjoying their day off. "And how did it go with that blonde swordsman?" Cao Cao asked while eating some chips. "Oh, you mean Kiba? Well, let's just say that he will never be alone," the brown-haired boy said with an innocent and childish smile. Chapter 10. A normal day. A week had already passed since Hyoudou Kiba was killed by Issei. The Grimoire clan learned of this fateful news, for them, because they found Kiba's disemboweled body in the streets of the underworld. In case you have any doubts, Issei only locked Kiba's soul with Till, so that he could be tortured for all eternity by the creepypasta. You can see the residents of the Grimoire clan. You can see a red-haired child, characteristic of this clan of demons. This was Milika's Grimoire, son of the deceased demon king Surzich's Lucifer. The red-haired boy was very sad. Some may be wondering why his sadness. One would think that he was sad because of the recent death of his father, and I will tell you that that cannot be wrong. Milikas was not even a little bit sad about his father's death. This was because Milikas was the only one who was against locking up Issei. After learning of his father's actions, he lost all the respect and love he had. The real reason why he was in that state was because he really missed the person he considered a brother, but it also hurt him to see what he had become, although he believed that even deep down, very deep down, there was still something of that cheerful brown-haired boy left. But Issei. We can see the brown-haired boy relaxing in the comfort of his beautiful mansion. He was sitting in a beautiful wide armchair enjoying a good movie, Avengers Endgame, on his 9000 HD flat screen. Issei and his subordinates were enjoying their day off. That is, Issei had killed the mass. He sowed fear in all supernatural beings. Apart from the fact that he and his subjects eliminated the Hindu faction, they deserved a rest. At this moment there were only the brown-haired boy and trihexa in the mansion. This was because Cao Cao, taking advantage of his rest, decided to go for a beautiful and relaxing walk on an excursion through the mountains, leaving the pair alone. Although something that Issei noticed was that trihexa had been acting strange lately. She looked very nervous and sometimes blushed when she was near her. He already had an idea of what could be happening to the dragon, but he simply decided to ignore it. After all, it was his vacation. Once he finished watching the movie, he turned off the screen. Wow, what an amazing movie. Although I was really drawn to that Infinity Gauntlet, maybe I created it and used it to eliminate some faction. He said as he stood up from the couch. The boy climbed the stairs of his mansion until he reached the dragon goddess's room. When he was in front of the door, he knocked, waiting for the girl's response. A few seconds later the purple-haired girl came out, and upon seeing the boy she couldn't help but blush slightly, but without losing her neutral expression. "Oh, Issei-sama, what can I help you with?" the girl asked respectfully. "Well, taking advantage of the fact that it's our day off, I was thinking of going out for a walk, and I was wondering if you'd like to go with me?" the brown-haired boy asked without shame or hesitation, smiling. The girl's mind exploded upon hearing those words. At the same time her blush increased noticeably. She felt like her heart began to beat faster and faster. Without knowing it she began to feel a lot of joy. Did he just ask me on a date? Was the thought of a nervous and happy trihexa? "That's sure," was the only thing she answered, surprised by what she had just heard. The brunette simply smiled even more upon hearing her answer. "Excellent, well, get changed and I'll wait for you downstairs," Issei said as he headed to the ground floor of his home, leaving a very surprised and blushing purple-haired girl who didn't know how to react. After a few minutes, you could see the purple-haired girl dressed in casual clothes, but at the same time they gave her an air of elegance and did not take away her natural beauty. Well, where are we going now?" the dragon of the apocalypse asked somewhat uncertainly. I have an idea." The brown-haired boy laughed playfully. Issei took the girl's hand, making her blush quite a bit, and then we would disappear in some kind of vortex. Trihexa was a little dizzy, she still hadn't gotten used to that strange way of teleporting. She was like that for a few seconds and then recovered. "Look, we're here," Issei exclaimed while standing in front of the girl. This would move away, showing that they were on a beautiful large mountain surrounded by lots of vegetation, apart from the fact that there was a beautiful river at the foot of the mountain. The girl was completely amazed by the sight. She could feel the fresh air hitting her delicate face and slightly moving her long purple hair. Her eyes shone with fascination, almost hypnotized by the sight. She also felt the sunlight hitting her pale and delicate skin. She could feel the warmth she had not felt in centuries because she was locked in the bosom of the biblical god. "This is beautiful." It was the only thing that came out of the delicate and fine lips of the girl, who continued to contemplate the beautiful landscape. "That's right, I discovered this place a short time ago and I thought I'd show you," Issei said, approaching until he was next to Trihexa. The purple-haired girl, without saying anything, lowered her head while her hair covered her eyes. "Because?" "Hey, what do you mean, Trihexa-san?" the brunette asked, somewhat confused. "Why are you like this to me? In the past I tried to kill you, but now not only have I been freed from my prison, but you've also given me a new life, a life where I can finally be happy. I just don't understand why you go to so much trouble for someone like me," was what the girl said while a couple of tears could be seen falling down her cheeks. Issei couldn't help but be a little surprised by Trihexa's words. Without saying anything, he approached her, taking her chin gently and softly, lifting her face, making her look at him. The boy could see those beautiful scarlet red eyes. They looked like a pair of beautiful bright rubies. "Why did they lock you up unjustly? When the biblical god found you at the end of the world, he was scared when he realized that you were stronger than him, and like every coward, he locked you up. That's why he freed you," the brown-haired boy said with a soft smile and a comforting tone of voice. Issei would take Trihexa by the hand, drawing her towards him. "You were locked up for a long time, you couldn't see the beauty of this world, let me show you," Issei proposed, smiling warmly. The girl's heart was beating 1,000 times a second. She felt like her heart was about to jump out of her chest. Without saying anything she just smiled sweetly, looking at the boy with happiness. I would like that," the girl said in a soft yet happy tone. Issei smiled at this. He began to walk, guiding Trihexa, beginning to go down the mountain. With a simple gesture of his hands, he would make the trees in front of them move away, leaving them a small path with the branches of the trees as a kind of roof through which a little light would filter through. Issei took the purple-haired girl by the hand as they began to walk down the hallway. As they walked, the girl could see different types of plants and flowers that she found very beautiful, while her eyes fell on a small nest where there was a tender blue bird feeding its young. The girl could see how a small bird approached Issei, placing itself on his shoulder. The brown-haired boy noticed the small animal giving him a caress. As Trihexa watched the boy in that scene, she had to admit that she found it hard to believe at that moment that the boy in front of her was the same person who had murdered hundreds of thousands of supernatural beings, although that was not something that bothered her. In this way, both individuals continued their walk through the beautiful fauna, appreciating the beautiful wonders that Mother Nature could offer them. The atmosphere that surrounded them was calm and serene, added to the aura of peace that they both emanated. Anyone who saw them would think that they were a beautiful couple. At one point the girl stopped to look at some white flowers. She delicately picked one up while marveling at the beautiful flower between her delicate fingers. Issei could appreciate the beautiful and at the same time elegant and delicate appearance of the red-eyed girl being illuminated by some faint rays of sunlight that filtered through the branches. The boy had to admit that she looked beautiful, although he was dedicated to ending the supernatural. He also knew perfectly well that that did not mean that he could not enjoy a beautiful moment with a beautiful girl in front of him. After all, maybe in the future he could give her a chance. I mean, he was a god, and it was not bad to have someone by his side. In this way, they both continued with their walk while they calmly talked about trivial topics, leaving aside the elimination of supernatural beings. It seemed that when they were together they forgot about everything else. Time went by and without realizing it, they had reached the shore of a small river, which was now clean and crystalline to the point that it was transparent, and they were able to see some small fish. They both sat on the grass by the lake. Time had passed and it was already night. The starry sky was illuminated by the beautiful full moon. The young people continued talking calmly, occasionally letting out a funny laugh. Currently we can see both of them lying on the grass on the river bank. They were calmly observing the beautiful night sky. The cold night air added to the silence of the environment, made the atmosphere of the place very relaxing for both of them. Trihexa, somewhat unsure, would begin to bring her hand closer to Issei's, until before she realized it, she was already intertwining her fingers with the brown-haired boy's. The boy was a little surprised before this, turning to see the girl next to him. Issei would notice how his companion looked away, but he could still see a noticeable blush adorning Trihexa's cheeks. "Do wanted to thank you for bringing me here, it was the most fun I've had in a long time," was what the purple-haired girl said. "Heh, even more fun than killing supernatural beings?" I asked with a somewhat mocking smile. The girl let out a small laugh at what the brown-haired boy said. "I guess so." I let out a small smile. After the girl said those words, a silence reigned in the environment, but it was not an uncomfortable silence, it was a calm and comforting silence. Both of them stared into each other's eyes. Trihexa looked at the boy's beautiful chocolate eyes, while Issei stared in wonder at those beautiful rubies that the purple-haired girl had for eyes. Both, without realizing it, began to bring their faces closer while still looking at each other's beautiful eyes. As the girl got closer, she could feel Issei's breathing, she felt her own heart begin to beat faster and faster. Their lips were touching, however, just before they could join their lips, a small magic circle appeared in Issei's ear, interrupting the beautiful moment. "Issei-sama," the person exclaimed with a serious tone of voice. The one responsible for this was none other than Cao Cao. "Yes, what's wrong?" he asked calmly, but inside he was furious for having ruined the moment, but he had to contain himself. "I have something very important to tell you, it's about the Chaos Brigade," I reported in a serious tone of voice. Such a statement by the black-haired man surprised a brown-haired boy quite a bit. "Understood, see you at the mansion, me and Trihexa will go right away," I informed and then deactivated the magic circle, cutting off communication. The brown-haired boy just let out a heavy sigh to turn to look at the purple-haired girl. "We better get going," he said with a frown, something very unusual for him. The girl, without saying anything, would only nod in affirmation. She was somewhere between sad that they had interrupted the moment and furious with Cao Cao for having called them and interrupted them just now. Neither of them said anything, disappearing into a vortex, leaving the beautiful moon as the only spectator of what happened that night, whose light continued to illuminate the place where both young people once were. Chapter 11. The Chaos Brigade. We can see how Issei and Trihexa suddenly appear in the living room of their house mansion, although it was shown in their expressions that they were upset by the interruption. "Alright Cao Cao, what was that you wanted to tell us?" Issei demanded to know with a neutral look. The black-haired man tensed for a second under the darkened gaze of his leader, but quickly regained his serious countenance and proceeded to tell him the reason for their meeting. "Very well Issei-sama, after you and the factions defeated the Chaos Brigade and resealed Trihexa-san," he said but was interrupted. "No hard feelings about that," the brunette said, looking at the purple-haired girl. "No problem," he exclaimed simply. "Well, as I was saying, after that, the factions believed they had definitively defeated the Chaos Brigade, however several soldiers managed to survive, including Rizavam," the black-haired man explained seriously. Both Issei and Trihexa were shocked at the new information that had been revealed to them. "And can I know how or where you got this information?" the boy asked in a serious tone, something unusual for him. "During my vacation in the mountains I was walking quietly, however I began to hear some voices and out of curiosity, I decided to follow them. When I found the origin of those voices I realized that they were a couple of headed men talking about the return of the Chaos Brigade and well, you don't have to be a genius to know what that conversation was about. After that I called you and here we are." The bearer of the true longinus finished explaining. The brown-haired boy just thought for a few seconds, and without saying anything he began to walk slowly to the main door of his mansion, followed by his subordinates. The brown-haired boy stood at the entrance of his mansion as he watched the landscape in front of him with an expressionless face. When Issei didn't have his innocent smile on his face, it meant that a big mess was definitely coming. At his side were Cao Cao and Trihexa with serious faces. "What are your orders, sir?" the black-haired man asked seriously. Issei remained silent for a few seconds, he didn't say anything at all, he just stood there looking straight ahead. After a couple of minutes the brown-haired boy let out a light sigh. "Prepare the troops, there will be chaos," he said in a cold voice as his eyes glowed a hellish red and a psychopathic smile formed on his face. The camera zooms out showing that Issei's huge mansion was on a kind of miniature island, which was floating in nothingness. The camera zooms out even further, and while what Issei was observing, what was in front of the huge mansion was the multiverse itself. At the base of the Chaos Brigade. Inside a cave, which is located in a huge mountain in the Andes mountain range, you can see a large high-tech base, in which there were many supernatural beings, the vast majority being renegade demons, fallen angels and the occasional yokai. But now we find ourselves in the central room where you can see two people arguing and shouting at each other with great fury and at the same time with concern. Among those present were Cacabiel and Loki, who had been released from their respective portions a couple of weeks ago, and who upon learning of the chaos generated by their old enemy, were not happy at all. There was also Lilith with a serious face that reflected some annoyance, as she saw how Cacabiel and Loki were practically shouting at each other. "Silence!" the black-haired lowly ordered in a dead tone. Instantly they both stopped fighting, feeling a strong chill, however Loki couldn't help but open his mouth. "How the hell do you expect us to calm down, brat? You saw what that brat became, what he did and what he is capable of now, and not only that, but he himself said that he was going to finish off all supernatural beings, and that includes us," the Norse god shouted in anger and panic at the same time. Lilith simply gave Loki a cold look while releasing some of her power, making the god sweat, who simply remained silent. "I know the situation is serious, but panicking won't do us any good, and as for you, why don't you come out of your hiding place? I ask no one in particular." From the shadows a few steps were heard to reveal a black-haired boy with grey eyes, being none other than Arata. "I'm sorry, but watching those two argue is very funny," the black-haired man exclaimed with a mocking smile while looking at Loki and Cacabiel. "By the way, how long do you plan to keep that appearance? Rizavum." The boy's body began to glow, and after a few seconds the super demon and descendant of the original Lucifer, Rizavum Livan Lucifer, would be revealed. "It was already starting to get annoying to have that appearance, although it was worth it now that we have the Welsh dragon in our possession," said the albino man smiling evilly. "Anyway, we need to keep experimenting with that dragon to get all the potential we can. I have a feeling we're going to need it very soon," Lilith said with a monotonous look. The scene changes to show a small camp where a few soldiers were guarding the perimeter, making sure there was nothing out of the ordinary. "Ah, but how boring, nothing interesting happens," complained a demon soldier. His other classmates were only annoyed by his attitude. "Stop complaining, it's better to rest and do nothing," his companion, who was a fallen angel, scolded him. The sound was about to answer him when suddenly he heard a strange noise that put him on alert. "What was that?" "I asked no one in particular." "Hey, what's wrong with you now?" the fallen angel asked with annoyance. "I think I heard something, I'm going to go check it out," said the soldier. He would begin to walk until he reached a part surrounded by trees, being somewhat far from the others. "I think it was just my imagination," he exclaimed in an annoyed tone of voice at not having found anything. However, just as the soldier was retreating from the place, he did not realize how something was quickly approaching behind him until it was too late. The only thing that was heard throughout the mountain was a heartbreaking scream full of terror and agony. The demon's scream reached the ears of the rest of the soldiers. "What the hell was that?" the fallen man asked, somewhat upset. The soldiers got into a battle stance ready for anything, however they began to hear as if something was approaching, the sound was getting louder and louder, the soldiers began to sweat from nerves, from the noise they could deduce that there were hundreds or even thousands approaching, just when they thought they were about to arrive, whatever they were. They were knocked to the ground by something that had hit them from behind, they let out screams of pain as they felt themselves being stabbed and torn apart by what appeared to be large insect legs. The last thing they managed to see before being torn apart by the creatures were thousands of silhouettes of what appeared to be giant insects. Time skip. We can see the old man of Rizavum in what seemed to be a laboratory, a kind of capsule could be seen in the middle of the room. Inside the capsule there was a small bright green sphere, which received a large amount of rays. Apart from that, if one paid attention, one could hear screams of pain coming from the sphere. At this, on the face of the super demon, a big smile full of evil began to appear. When we're done with you, not even that brat will be able to defeat me, and all the factions will surrender at my feet, well, at least the ones that are left, ha 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 ha," he said in an evil manner and then let out a big evil laugh. Suddenly the alarm starts ringing throughout the lair, alerting all the guards along with Rizavum. "What the hell is going on now?" Rizivim asked, entering a room where Kakabiel, Loki and Lilith were looking at the security screens with expressions of astonishment on their faces, something very strange coming from Lilith. "Hey, what's going on, why aren't you answering?" the silver-haired demon demanded to know. He would approach the security camera screens, only to have his eyes widen in surprise as he saw an army of hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of horrible, nearly 2-meter-tall spider-like monsters outside the base. They were stabbing and tearing apart every living being that stood in front of them, slowly making their way to the lair. Although the soldiers managed to eliminate several of these creatures, for every one they eliminated, 3 more appeared in its place, continuing the massacre. Rizivim watched in surprise as his soldiers were being outnumbered and massacred by these aberrations. From one second to the next, his surprise turned to anger and fury. "What the hell are those things?" the silver-haired man demanded to know, but received no response. The albino man would check the security faces again, only to be surprised to find that they had been destroyed, leaving a very angry and confused Rizivim. At that moment a soldier entered the room, who was very upset. "Rizivim-sama, the creatures are defeating most of our soldiers, and their numbers continue to increase," the soldier reported. Rizivim, hearing that, would only increase his anger. At the same time that he let out a little of his aura, he would sigh, managing to calm down a little, and then turn his gaze to his subordinates. "Zack-Oblivion and Loki, you will take care of these creatures. From what we know so far is that they cannot fly, attack from the air, and tell the same to all the troops that remain. Lilith, you and I will look for the son of a hitch who caused this, but first I must collect something," he ordered in a cold voice as he left the room. Those mentioned only followed the orders of their leader, Kakabiel, along with Loki, and several soldiers would go out to the outskirts of the base, observing the creatures from the sky, and beginning to attack them with spears of light and magical attacks respectively. Thanks to this, they managed to drastically lower the number of the strange creatures. "We're getting there, keep attacking," Loki ordered the soldiers, who without complaint or delay continued to bombard the horrible monsters. It seemed that the balance had changed in favor of the Chaos Brigade. How wrong they were. From one second to the next, hundreds of similar creatures, but green and with wings, would appear flying at high speed against the soldiers of the brigade. At the appearance of the new monsters, the soldiers began to fall like flies, not only because of the power, but because of the enormous difference between the enemy army and them. Rizivim left his lair, being followed by the black-haired Loli. Rizivim's face reflected fury and astonishment at the same time. "Who the hell is responsible for this?" the super demon shouted in anger. Suddenly, on the battlefield, some applause began to be heard. But these were not ordinary applause, they were slower, and you could notice a certain touch of mockery in them. From one second to the next, all the monsters, whether terrestrial or aerial, stopped dead. Several of those on the ground moved aside, making way for a certain brown-haired boy who was responsible for the applause. Rizivim's eyes reflected surprise, anger, hatred and a little fear. "Why you?" was the only thing that came out of Rizivim's mouth. "Hello, Rizivim, did you miss me?" the brown-haired boy greeted innocently. Chapter 12. You are nothing. The atmosphere had become tense, to the point where the tension could be cut with a knife. Issei was with his typical smile in front of a surprised and furious Rizivim. They were in front of the new base of what was left of the Chaos Brigade, while around them were hundreds of arachnids and jumpers. The atmosphere was broken when Issei's voice echoed in the place. "Hi Rizivim, it's been a while since we last talked. I haven't seen you since you started torturing me by pretending to be Arata." The brunette's smile never disappeared. Rizivim was more furious than ever. Several throbbing veins were present due to his anger. "My mistake was not making sure to kill you, but this time I won't make the same mistake. I won't be overconfident. I'll go all out from the start and kill you, and once you're dead nothing will stand in my way," the silver-haired man said as an evil smile appeared on his face. The demon would take out a dark green sphere from his clothes, which gave off small red rays. Issei looked at this smiling, although he did not appear when he saw the sphere. He frowned a little. "Balance breaker. The place is illuminated by a great reddish light. At the same time some black rays come out of this light, damaging some arachnids." Issei looked at this without flinching in the least, while the wind currents that were produced moved his hair. Little by little the light went out, revealing the humanoid figure of the super demon. Rizivim now wore an imposing armor as black as night, with deep red jewels, which emitted a dangerous glow, apart from the fact that this same armor released great power and killing instinct. However, what caught the brown-haired boy's attention the most was that this armor was almost identical to his old sekiryuutei armor. "Oh, so you modified Drake." "I'm not going to lie to you Rizivim, that does bother me, but well, if you want to have an armor battle, then that's what you'll have." He finished so that a glow surrounded the brown-haired man's body, followed by a colossal power that could be felt throughout the place. Even the power that it gave off was so much that it could be felt throughout the universe. As the glow faded, Issei could be seen wearing beautiful armor, with glued wings that released gigantic divine power. Let the massacre begin, Rizavam. Issei smiled mockingly. The battle has begun. Without wasting time, Rizavam takes out a pair of black dragon wings with red details and sneaks at incredible speed against Issei, connecting a blow to the stomach followed by a kick, sending him crashing into some trees. The demon did not stop there and began to throw hundreds of magic spheres at him, which hit their target, raising a smoke screen. "Don't think I'm done, you damn brat," Rizavam shouted arrogantly. He flew towards where Issei's body was to grab him by the arm and throw him into the air with all his strength. While the boy's body was in the air, Rizavam began to deliver a huge amount of blows at an enormous speed. "Suffer, you damn bastard," the white-haired man shouted with an arrogant smile. This one would appear behind the chestnut, giving him a hammer blow, sending him to the ground again. The dark-armored demon wouldn't give the boy time to rest, giving him a huge amount of blows again, while Issei only managed to cover himself with his arms. "Is that all, you clown? At this rate you won't even be able to scratch my armor, much less me," the boy said mockingly as he covered himself with his forearms. Rizavam only got angry when he heard the brat's mockery. He jumped away and then summoned a large number of circles, which were aimed at Issei. The magic circles began to shine, and from one second to the next, a huge rain of magical attacks were fired towards the boy in shining armor, literally XD. Issei didn't even bother to dodge the attacks, he simply put his arms in an X, while each and every attack hit his body. Once the attacks ended, Issei lowered his arms, looking with a neutral gaze at Rizavam, who observed him with superiority. Ha 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 ha. The super demon's insane laughter echoed throughout the mountain, while his opponent simply watched him without even blinking. The white-haired boy, once he stopped laughing, looked at the brown-haired boy. "Oh, ha, I'm sorry, I'm just still surprised by the immense power I've obtained thanks to your old partner. Once I defeat you, the factions will see that there is no one above me. This will undoubtedly be the greatest victory of my entire life." Ha 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 ha, the super demon laughed arrogantly. "Your greatest victory, you say?" Issei asked with a hollow smile and cold eyes. Boost 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 boost. Drake's voice repeated over and over again, although pain and suffering could be noticed in his words, a clear sign that they were using his power against his will. "Of course I'm going to win, you're just a stone in my way," Rizavam shouted euphorically. Once again, magic circles would appear, only now there were hundreds and much more powerful than before. Hundreds of magical attacks would be directed at Issei. "Come on, show me how your proud face melts in desperation trying to dodge all those attacks," said the demon madly. The brown-haired boy didn't move a muscle, he simply stood there waiting for the attacks that were getting closer and closer. "Hey, who's gonna run away?" At that moment each and every one of the attacks hit Issei, who didn't even cover himself. This action left the white-haired man stupefied, who opened his eyes in shock. But what, self-destruction, suicide, no, this can't be, what kind of victory is this, if my opponent lets himself be killed in such a pathetic way, the demon shouted angrily. As Rizavam continued to complain about the dust, a voice he instantly recognized was heard. "Don't fool yourself, who would turn their back on a clown like you?" Issei's voice echoed through the cloud of smoke, as it dissipated the brown-haired boy could be seen completely unharmed, not even his armor had suffered any damage. "This battle isn't over yet," Issei shouted, looking at Rizavam with his typical smile. The demon showed surprise at seeing the brown-haired boy intact, and then let out a few laughs. "Haha, I'm glad you didn't die from something so simple, but let's see if you can withstand the next attack." Two thrusters emerged from Rizavam's armor on his back, and the demon shot out like a bullet towards Issei, landing a devastating blow in the middle of his stomach. Boost 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 boost. The white-haired man began to drag the brown-haired man's body along the ground, causing his body to pass through trees and large threads, which at the slightest contact with Issei's body, were reduced to rubble. At one point Rizavam stops dragging Issei and begins to hit him again with hundreds of blows that sink him into the ground at the same time that a large crater is generated beneath him. The demon could feel how his opponent's power was decreasing more and more, so he would decide to end the battle once and for all. He would stop hitting Issei and rise to the sky. Boost 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 boost. "This will end it, Devil Dragon shot," the demon shouted with all his might. This one, concentrating all his magic, would release a gigantic power, which went at great speed, ending up impacting against Issei. This attack generated an enormous explosion that devastated the entire forest. Rizavam looked with a proud gaze at all the destruction he had caused thanks to his new power. Without a doubt that damn brat is now dead, this is without a doubt the greatest victory in my entire life." Rizavam heard a scream. The laughter continued for a few seconds until he heard a voice coming from the huge crater that his final attack had formed. "Hey clown." Rizivum's laughter stopped instantly as he turned to see in absolute shock how the smoke revealed the intact figure of Issei, who was still in his armor. The demon could not believe what his eyes were seeing. "You call this your greatest victory?" What a good joke." The brunette mocked with a cold smile. "Impossible." Rizivum was in shock at what he saw. It wasn't until a terrifying idea struck his mind, his face twisted into a grimace of complete terror. Don't tell me that the entire battle was just to measure my power." The demon did not need a clear answer, the only answer he received was the enormous feeling of terror and despair running through every feeling in his body as he felt the power of his enemy increase to such an extent that it left Great Red like an ant. Just now you realize." Issei's smile went from innocent to evil. "Bad for you." In less than a second the brunette had appeared behind Rizivum with one of his arms in hand. The demon looked at the place where his arm had previously been with surprise and fear, then let out a huge cry of pain that was heard throughout the place. "You think you're such a big deal just because you got a little more power, which you stole from me?" the brown-eyed man said, pulling Rizivum's arm aside, who continued to scream in pain. "But you're nothing more than a little bird who thinks he's special because of the luxurious birdseed he stole from others." The brown-haired man began to slowly approach the demon, "But the only truth here is that you are nothing." Issei finished saying while face to face with the demon, while the boy had an empty expression and no emotion whatsoever. Rizivum saw Issei's empty, lifeless eyes, and the only thing he could feel at that moment was the deepest fear. In a desperate attempt the demon would try to hit the brown-haired boy in the face. However, this was useless. Issei caught the blow without any problem, then the albino received a powerful knee to the stomach, which knocked the wind out of him and caused some blood. Issei grabbed the demon by the neck, forcing him to look at his face. "It's time for me to hit you back," he said, smiling innocently. At a speed far greater than that of light, Issei delivered thousands and thousands of blows to Rizivum, who could not even think before receiving each and every blow. His armor slowly began to crack until he reached a point where his entire armor showed many critically damaged parts. It even seemed like it was going to fall to pieces at any moment. Rizivum was breathing heavily as some blood dripped from his mouth. "F-bucking bastard," he said with difficulty. Issei simply stared at the emaciated man smiling. "Oh, I forgot something, I have to get my friend back." The demon was surprised by those words, but before he could even put himself on guard, Issei took with his hand the red gem that was in the center of the armor. What happened next was that a great red light followed by many black rays and screams of pain from the decrepit old Rizivum filled the entire mountain. After a few seconds, Issei could be seen with a bright green jewel in his hand, while Rizivum was barely staying in the air with his demon wings. "Well Rizivum, I'd like to say that this was a pleasure, but we both know that I hate you, and I want you to go book yourself," he said with a psychopathic smile. "Well Rizivum, this will be the last attack." A large amount of energy began to accumulate in Issei's hands. He was about to release his attack Pegasus meteors. The demon would try to dodge the attack, but his efforts were useless. He ended up fully receiving the attack due to the power he was sent to the ground being on the verge of death. "Ah damn" was all he could think. The last thing Rizivum could see was Trihexa and Cao Cao going with Issei in a magic circle, leaving a half-dead Rizivum to be slowly devoured and torn apart by the arachnids that continued to destroy the base, while the heartbreaking screams of pain and pleas of the super demon adorned the place. Chapter 13. Depression. Depression can be described as feeling sad, blue, unhappy, down or down. Most of us feel this way from time to time for short periods. Depression, that was what Ria's Gremory experienced, heiress of the Gremory clan, a high-class demon. Her deceased brother was the Mao Lucifer. She always grew up surrounded by luxuries belonging to the most important family in the underworld. She was known, adored and respected by most demons, who nicknamed her the Crimson Princess of Destruction due to her characteristic crimson red hair like blood itself, but we are straying from the subject. 2 months had passed since the death of Shiva and the fall of the Hindu faction, and Issei defeated Rizivum and completely exterminated the Chaos Brigade. Currently we can see the red-haired girl waking up in her room's bed. Since the attack on Kuo City and its destruction at the hands of Issei's parademons, she and her entourage, or what was left of it, began to live in the Gremory mansion. This also because the human world was no longer considered safe for supernatural beings. Rias upon waking up hoped that everything was a dream and that things would be as they were before, with Issei being her cute pawn and her entourage once again united and having fun. Unfortunately reality hit her, and upon realizing that everything was real, she could only shed a couple of tears. She dried her tears to go to the bathroom to brush her teeth and get ready. She went to have breakfast with the rest of her entourage, although as she walked through the halls, she noticed how the servants who worked in the mansion looked at her with hatred and resentment. Those looks, those damn looks that Issei had to endure, each one of those looks were like daggers that were buried in her, but she couldn't let herself be hurt by that kind of thing. After all, her beloved Issei had suffered things much worse. She arrives at the dining room where her servants and parents were waiting for her for breakfast. They ate in silence, no one said a single word. They were not in the mood, and how could they be if they were practically at a meeting of apocalyptic scales? Riaz looked at each of the servants, noticing how they had changed a lot in this time. She knew them and knew that they were not well just by looking into their eyes, some being very obvious. Bakeno showed a gloomy and sad look, her eyes were dull, her smile that she almost always showed was gone, she spent most of her time sad, and Riaz would swear that she had heard her cry at night, this since their rooms were next to each other. Asia was in a similar state to Akeno, her appearance was sad and downcast, she stayed awake most of the night praying for Issei to forgive her, she still held on to hope that things would go back to the way they were in the old, beautiful memories she had, and still held on to with all the love in her being poor stupid girl. Breakfast passed in a long awkward silence. No one said anything, and once they finished breakfast, everyone stood up and went their separate ways. As she laughed, she walked through the halls of the Gremory mansion, a great wave of memories hit her mind. The beautiful moments he had spent with his entire entourage. When he turned Issei into a demon. When he saved her from her engagement to Razor. How they fell in love. He even remembered all the battles they lived together. Since the incident with Rainier. Until the fight against the Chaos Brigade and the liberation of Trihexa. All that he lost it. And now he was paying the price for his mistake. The factions had come to light. Humans no longer worshipped them, and because of this they became increasingly weaker. The heaven system collapsed, taking all the sacred gears with it. The Hindu faction, the most powerful of all, had fallen, leaving no survivors. But one of the things that upset Ian the most was that his beloved older brother was dead, and he couldn't stop blaming himself every day. Every night before going to sleep she couldn't bear the guilt and burst into tears, using her pillow to muffle her cries until she fell asleep. With those thoughts in mind, Rissa walked sadly until she left the Gremory mansion without caring what her parents might say to her, at this point nothing mattered to her. As he walked through the streets of the underworld he could see that there was absolutely no one on the streets, so much was the fear of Issei that no one had the courage to even set foot on the street. With every step the Redeed took, she could perfectly feel the sad and desolate atmosphere that was now totally common in the streets of the underworld. In this way the Gremory continued walking in total and absolute silence, until she reached her destination, the cemetery. Upon entering this place I could see many tombs of different demons, whether warriors or simple civilians, but this one was not there for any of them. Riaz eventually ended up in front of a specific grave, on which a name could be read, Surzich's Gremory. And there she was, in front of her brother's grave, who had died at the hands of the person he once loved with all his soul, but who due to his stupidity, he had lost forever. Hello Onisama, how have you been? Well, a lot of things have happened since you left, unfortunately none of them are good, more things have gone from bad to worse, the Hindu faction has been completely masked, in other words the Hindus have become extinct, and now that humans no longer worship us, we are losing more and more power. The heaven system collapsed and the sacred gears stopped working, Kiba was killed, and I'm scared. The Redeed couldn't take it anymore and fell to her knees in front of her brother's grave, beginning to shed tears in droves. I'm scared, I'm so scared, Issei is not the same anymore, he's destroying all the factions as if they were nothing, and it seems like his armies are growing non-stop, he's not playing, I want everything to be like before, but I know this is impossible, but still, that's what I want, I wish for it with all my strength, I want this damn nightmare to end once and for all. Riaz couldn't take it anymore and broke down in front of her brother's grave as rivers of tears ran down her cheeks, the girl's wails could be heard throughout the cemetery. With Issei. We can see the chestnut lying under a tree with all the tranquility in the world, next to him was Trihexa looking at the beautiful landscape in front of them calmly. This place had been created by Issei to relax and have a moment of calm, even he needed a break from killing so many supernatural beings he found, it's not that he would stop committing genocides, but it ended up becoming repetitive. This place is very beautiful. Said the beast of the apocalypse, watching as the petals of the trees flowed with the gentle wind all over the place, giving it an even more relaxing appearance. The boy was lying down with his eyes closed, but he still spoke calmly to his partner. That's why I created this place. Even I need a moment to relax, just like everyone else. The brunette answered without changing his position. At that moment, Cao Cao appeared from a magic circle wearing an elegant black suit. Issei opened his eyes and looked at his subordinate. Tell me, Coco, what is Drake's current status? The brown-haired boy asked simply. The purple-haired girl next to him couldn't contain her laughter at Issei's joke about the name of the bearer of the true longinus. The current state of the Welsh dragon is stable, he is still unconscious, but he will recover in a few hours," said the black-haired man with a vein on his forehead from the mockery of his name. "Well, I think while Drake recovers we can continue with the next phase of the plan," Issei said, standing up, followed by Trihexa. "The next phase?" the purple-haired girl asked, looking at her leader. "It's pretty simple actually, we split up and each one will take charge of a faction, each one will go with one of the armies to speed up and facilitate the extermination, simple, quick and easy for the whole family." The brown-haired boy explained as if he were talking about the weather. "And which factions will we go to, Issei-sama?" the bearer of the true Longinus asked seriously. At this question, Issei showed a deranged and sadistic smile, already having in mind the targets to be attacked. "Hachian Yakai. We are located in the temple where Yusaka, the leader of the entire Yakai faction, was." The blonde woman was extremely worried about the situation the factions were in. As the days went by she could feel her power rapidly declining. Another matter that caused him great sadness was his little daughter, Kunu. "I'll try it, girl," she had fallen into a depression after the whole truth about Issei was discovered. The fact that he had gone crazy and killed the mass and declared war on the factions hadn't helped much. The kitsune's thoughts were interrupted when a great tremor hit the entire temple, due to which the woman fell to the ground. "What the hell is going on?" Yusaka asked, alarmed. At that moment a guard would enter the room at full speed and great fear could be seen on his face. "Yusaka-sama, we are under attack," the guard shouted angrily to his leader. The kitsune opened her eyes in surprise at this, but a great amount of fear could also be seen in her gaze. At this moment, the woman was praying to all the existing deities that the person who was attacking them was not the one she was thinking of. Outside the temple, the entire Yakai faction could be seen being attacked by horrible humanoid creatures, with large sharp claws, scaly, grey skin, a long tail, but the most notable thing was that they had no eyes. There were also other creatures similar to the previous ones, but unlike the others, these were smaller, and their body was similar to that of a dog. These horrendous beasts attacked everything that moved. Obviously being Yakais. Several soldiers appeared and began to attack the creatures by burning their clothes. In themselves, they were not very strong, however, the real problem was not their power, the real problem was the excessive amount of these beings. For every monster they eliminated, 3 more appeared to take its place, and while they weren't exactly strong, they were extremely fast and agile, which allowed them to dodge the Yakai soldiers' attacks without much trouble. The one who commanded this army of horrible and lethal monsters was none other than the bearer of the true Longinus, Cao Cao. But what Yusaka didn't know was that they weren't the only faction being attacked. Nordic faction. On the outskirts of Asgard was a huge army of enormous beings completely black, with white masks, several spikes around the neck resembling a kind of collar, and their most notable detail being a large hole in the middle of the torso. Leading this great army was Trihexa, looking with an evil smile at the kingdom of the Norse gods. The simple fact of imagining old Odin begging for his life was exciting her, and unable to contain herself any longer she gave the order. "They attack." But that simple word, the lesser ones began to advance towards the city where the Nordic faction lived. Greek faction. We can see Issei standing in front of a big mountain, and at the top of it there was a large amount of clouds covering something, as if they were trying to hide it from the rest of the world. Although the chestnut tree knew perfectly well that it was that place. It was Mount Olympus. "Well, it's time to play," he said in a childish voice, but with a psychopathic smile. Chapter 14. The Fall of the Yakais. The Yakai faction. Yakais in short are spiritual creatures from Japanese folklore, considered to be ghosts or spirits. Right now we can see a family of Yakais, all of whom have dog ears, happily having dinner with their families. The atmosphere in the place was full of peace, and the family laughed without worries. At that point the father of the family heard someone desperately knocking on the door. Surprised, he went to open the door while his family continued eating dinner peacefully. The entire family froze when they saw a crimson-red liquid begin to appear in the hallway. The Yakai woman stood up in fear and instantly ran to find her husband, only to find a horrible quadruped creature devouring the corpse of her now deceased husband. The man's corpse had his stomach open with his guts outside, staining the floor of his house with his own blood and dyeing the wood of the floor a deep red. His face reflected a horrible grimace of terror, while it seemed that even in death, he was looking in the direction of his wife. The Yakai woman looked at this scene more than horrified. Her body did not move due to the shock of seeing her husband dead on the floor of her own house. She knew she had to escape, however her body did not listen to her. It was as if her brain had disconnected. Because of this the woman couldn't react when the horrible beast lunged at her, and well, the result is rather obvious. "Mommy, Daddy, what's wrong?" the little Yakai girl asked, peeking out only for her body to freeze in sheer terror as she saw the Demogorgon chewing on her mother's severed head like it was candy. The monster turned to look at her and lunged at her. The poor girl could only let out a deafening scream of terror, which later turned into one of fear, and finally a deathly silence took over the room, only the sound of the Demogorgon chewing on the little girl's corpse could be heard. Cao Cao walked very calmly through the streets of the city of the Yakuza. The only word that could be used to describe the current state of this place would be disturbing. The streets were bathed in the blood of the Yakuza. The black-haired man looked up at the sky contemplating the beautiful night sky. The sound of the footsteps of the young bearer of the true Longinus were drowned out by the sound of the Yakai's flesh being torn and devoured by the Demogorgons and Domodogs. Rivers of blood flowed through the streets and ended up falling into the sewers. The sound of the Yakai's screams of terror became a beautiful symphony to the black-haired man's ears. I could feel it in the air. The fear. Desperation. The smell of blood in the air was so strong that it almost burned his nostrils, but even that couldn't stop Cao Cao from walking calmly. The cold gaze of the bearer of the true Longinus was unchanging, even as he watched men, women, children, the elderly, and even babies being slaughtered and killed by the troops his leader provided him. As the young man walked through the bloody red streets, a noise reached his ears that completely caught his attention. The cry of a baby. Turning towards where the noise came from, Cao Cao's cold and stoic gaze fixed on a small baby yakai, who was crying inconsolably in the arms of his mother's corpse. The baby's tiny body was stained with the blood of his late mother. The black-haired boy stood there as he watched the little baby cry for what seemed like years, but was actually only a few seconds. Without saying a word he began to walk towards the little yakai. As he walked he could feel the blood of those horrible creatures staining his shoes, and he wasn't referring to the Demogorgons. Once he was in front of the child, he was able to appreciate him better. The baby appeared to be just over a year old, with blonde hair and green eyes, which were filled with tears. Cao Cao stared at the little baby crying in his late mother's arms. As he looked at the baby he couldn't help but think. So fragile. Like a dry leaf in autumn. So weak. It looked as if it was going to disappear at any moment. But that thought in mind Cao Cao continued to stare at the baby. The black-haired man's eyes were as cold as ice. Little by little he brought his hand closer to the little yakai who was still crying. When he touched the infant's small head he could feel his hair and soft skin. But in that, the crying stopped. As soon as the 5 fingers of the young black-haired man's hand touched the little baby's head, the yakai's entire body began to slowly disintegrate. After a few seconds, the baby's body was reduced to a small mound of dust that was carried away by the wind. The sound of yakai flesh being torn apart by demogorgons and demodongs returned to the ears of the bearer of the true Longinus. He turned around without showing even a single trace of regret as the wind finished taking away the remains of dust that were once a small living being. Without exceptions. This was what Cao Cao said in a completely cold and remorseless voice. The black-haired man continued walking at a steady pace with a single goal in mind. It only took a couple of minutes for him to arrive in front of the main palace, where Yusaka and her daughter Kunu were. Hundreds of guardians came out of the palace to defend their leader, however they were of no use. Cao Cao eliminated them all with a simple movement of his true Longinus. The black-haired man's troops had not approached the palace by orders of Cao Cao himself, he alone would be the one to eliminate the kitsunes. With a firm step he continued walking among the corpses of the soldiers who tried to stop him. The young black-haired man realized that the palace was surrounded by a powerful magical barrier. Unfazed by this, he held his weapon tightly and firmly, and in less than a second, with enormous speed and devastating force, he destroyed the barrier, which shattered as if forcing open a cheap glass window. Without stopping his walk, the black-haired man continued advancing with a deadly calm, while he was followed behind him by hundreds of demogorgons and demon dogs. The palace gates were destroyed by a blow from Cao Cao's true Longinus. The black-haired man walked with a firm step with no intention of stopping. Several guards appeared trying to defend the place, being eliminated like simple flies, either by the black-haired man's sacred gear or torn to pieces by the demogorgons. Ascending to the deepest part of the palace, the boy found a kind of bunker, which was surrounded by several magical barriers. With a mocking smile he raised the true Longinus high and without a doubt launched a powerful attack that tore apart each and every one of the barriers as if they were sheets of paper, and as if this were not enough, it also blew the enormous metal door to pieces. The factions are getting weaker and weaker, this is almost like child's play. Cao Cao began with a mockery and a cynical smile. As soon as the black-haired man set foot inside the bunker, he heard a female voice scream in terror. "Get away from us." After that shout, some kinds of blue flames were shot out towards the black-haired man and his troops. Using his sacred gear, the boy managed to say all the flames that were heading towards him, although some of these did manage to hit some demogorgons, which were reduced to a pile of ashes due to the strong attack. Cao Cao's cold and piercing eyes stared at the people in front of him. Isaka, the leader of the Yakai faction, and her daughter Kunu, the princess of the same race. At this point it is possible that these two are the only Yakeis left alive, not counting Kaneko and Kuroka. The little girl's eyes reflected pure terror as she tried to take refuge behind her mother. Isaka, for her part, also looked with fear at the black-haired man and the hundreds of horrible monsters that were behind him. With one hand she hugged her daughter, trying to give her security. "Long time no see, leader of the Yakeis, Yusaka," the black-haired man exclaimed in a cold voice. Charging at him, Yusaka launched herself at great speed, ready to deliver a powerful blow. Letting out a heavy sigh, he blocked the attack with his true longiness, generating a small wind wave. The Yakai Kitsune continued to throw blow after blow, trying to at least hurt the black-haired man in some way. However, all the woman's efforts were useless. Each of her blows was blocked without any difficulty. After a while blocking all the Kitsune's attacks, Cao Cao got fed up and connected a devastating stab to the blonde's stomach, piercing her with his weapon from side to side. Kunu screamed in horror as she watched the blood continue to flow from the wound in her mother's stomach. The little girl instantly ran towards her mother, however before she could even get close to her a pair of demogorgons caught her, not letting her move. "Don't let me go, let me go, let me go now," the girl screamed in terror as tears welled up in her eyes as she desperately tried to escape from the grip of both beasts. Raising her head slightly, Yusaka looked in horror as her daughter was captured by those horrible monsters. The blonde kitsune turned her gaze towards Cao Cao, looking with fury and hatred at the young black-haired boy. "I'll let her go," the woman demanded, no, rather begged, while feeling enormous fear of what could happen to her little daughter. A few seconds passed where neither the black-haired man nor the blonde said anything. A deathly silence took over the place, only the cries of the little Yakai girl being audible. Cao Cao's cold eyes were fixed on the kitsune, who continued to bleed on the ground, unable to move. "Would you be willing to sacrifice yourself for her?" Cao Cao asked coldly. The blonde woman opened her eyes in surprise at that question. "If you really care about your daughter, answer me. Would you be willing to sacrifice everything you have, your body, mind and soul for her own good?" The black-haired man's voice was as cold as the South Pole itself, giving both women chills. "Oh, of course I do. My daughter is the most important thing to me. My duty as a mother is to protect her and make sure she never lacks anything and can live happily, even if it is at the cost of my own life." Yusaka's voice echoed in the room with great determination. Cao Cao's cold gaze never changed as he continued to stare at the woman who was still bleeding to death. "Okay," with a simple look the demogorgons released the little girl, who instantly ran to her mother while crying with concern. "I give you my word, and I swear that neither I nor my troops will kill your daughter." Hearing that, a small spark of hope flashed in the older blonde's eyes as she tried to stand up with great difficulty due to her injury. But in that, Cao Cao in a quick movement took out a syringe with a green liquid inside and without hesitation, he tried it all to Yusaka through his arm. With a cry the kitsune knelt on the ground holding her arm in pain from the injection. Kunu looked worriedly at her mother, who was beginning to feel strange. What did you do? What did you have with that syringe?" Kunu asked desperately, looking at the bearer of the true longiness. "As I told you, neither I nor my troops will kill you, that was my word and my promise." Without saying anything else, Cao Cao turned around and began to leave the place with his troops, leaving Mana's Kitsuks alone. "Oka-san, are you okay?" Oka-san, the Yakai girl asked worriedly, looking at her mother. However, as soon as she looked at her mother, her expression changed to one of true terror. Her mother, who was a beautiful woman with fair skin and beautiful blonde hair, apart from being considered one of the greatest beauties in the entire supernatural world, was now in a simply sickly and repulsive state. Simply the state in which her mother was in could not be described. Her eyes had turned yellow with strange red marks, apart from showing a wild and unhinged expression. Her skin had turned a greenish hue, while it seemed to melt and seemed bubbling. Some pieces of skin and flesh fell off showing the bones, and in other parts it showed its nerves. From her mouth, a kind of green slime came out in large quantities. All her previous beauty had completely vanished. "Oh, Oka-san?" a terrified and disgusted Kunu asked, unconsciously taking steps back. What was once the leader of the Yakeis, Yusaka, slowly turned to see the girl, who was more than terrified. Without saying a single word, the hideous creature pounced on the girl, its nails dug into the girl's flesh and began to tear it apart, even going so far as to rip off large chunks of flesh. It even used its rotten teeth to bite and tear her apart. The one who was once Yusaka had become a wild animal, with the only thought in her destroyed mind being to kill the first person who stood in front of her, and unfortunately, that person was Kunu. "Oka-san, stop please, leave me." "Oka-san," the girl screamed in terror as she felt herself being torn apart by her own mother. At the same time tears came out of her eyes due to fear and pain. "Help please, someone help me, whoever please, help me please, I beg you, Kami-sama, help please, Kami-sama." The girl screamed in complete and absolute desperation as she felt large pieces of her flesh being torn off by the teeth of the horrible beast that her mother had become, which began to decorate the girl who was still alive. After a few minutes the girl's screams ceased as a disgusting scene was seen where the one who was once Hisaka was on top of Kunu's corpse, which had an expression of terror and pain and blood on her face. The girl's body was completely torn apart, the most notable detail being the fact that her stomach was wide open and her troops outside, which were being devoured by the monster that Hisaka had become. Far away from that place was Cao Cao, who watched this scene through a magic screen. I knew the plague of madness would be useful, but I never expected this result. In the end everything turned out better than expected. The black-haired man said with a slight smile, mission accomplished, the Yakase have fallen. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.